The evening air was heavy with the scent of rain-dampened cobblestones and the faint perfume of lilacs, carried in on the chill wind that swept through the streets of London. Lamps flickered in the mist, casting trembling shadows along the walls of the grand ballroom where the city's elite had gathered, their whispers a low, constant hum beneath the strains of a string quartet. Candles perched in gilded candelabras bathed the high ceiling in soft amber light, illuminating the crystal chandeliers that hung like frozen stars above the polished oak floor. Every surface gleamed, from the polished banisters to the marble hearths, yet despite the luxury, the air was taut with expectation. Tonight, gossip would dance as surely as the lords and ladies themselves. She stepped into the room with measured poise, her skirts modest but impeccably neat, and her dark eyes sharp beneath a carefully pinned veil. Though she was a lady's companion, her presence carried the kind of quiet defiance that distinguished her from those who trembled at the slightest glare of society. Each step she took was deliberate, a subtle rebellion against the rigid hierarchy that confined her. Still, she felt the weight of every gaze, the subtle tilt of heads, the murmurs curling like smoke through the throng. A careless misstep could be fatal to reputation. Yet, perhaps for the first time, she allowed herself a small thrill at the audacity of it all. Across the ballroom, near a group of whispering matrons, he stood. The Duke, he of whispered legend and unassailable wealth, leaned lightly against a marble pillar, his posture commanding, his dark coat tailored with ruthless precision. Rumors of his fortune were common knowledge. Tales of his dealings, whispered in cautious tones by those who feared the consequences of indiscretion, painted him as a man who owned half of London and half its secrets. Yet there was a restraint about him that made his presence more dangerous than any scandal. A stillness that suggested he saw far more than the room imagined, that he measured the world with a gaze that weighed both worth and folly. She did not yet know his reputation, only that the murmur of his name drew a sharp intake of breath from those who recognized him. Curiosity, insolent and dangerous, ignited behind her careful composure. She could not help but glance at the Duke's elaborate attire, a coat of midnight velvet embroidered with silver thread, gloves so pale they seemed carved from marble, a cravat precisely folded, and feel a flicker of amusement. His attention to formality was almost theatrical, a performance that demanded awe and obedience. In the solitude of her mind, she whispered a jest that would have been harmless if left unspoken, a sly thought at the audacity of the Duke's appearance. Half of London, yet perhaps not half so terrifying as he fancies. It was the faintest of misjudgments. The laughter that followed in her own head was not meant for ears, but the universe, it seemed, had other plans. Her words slipped into the hush between the murmurs of silk skirts and polished boots, carried perhaps by chance, perhaps by some cruel design, until the room held a suspended silence. Conversations faltered mid-sentence. A foot hesitated in its next step. Eyes, previously engaged in polite amusement elsewhere, turned with subtle alarm toward her. She felt it first as a flicker of awareness, then as the full, suffocating weight of scrutiny. A single misstep, a single foolish joke at the wrong moment, and she was naked before the judgment of London's finest. The Duke's gaze found her in that instant. It was not the polite recognition one might offer to a social equal, but something sharper, more precise, an appraisal of both audacity and danger. For a heartbeat, she felt exposed as though standing atop a cliff with wind threatening to hurl her into oblivion. Yet in the same heartbeat, there was a flicker of something else in his eyes, curiosity, a rare spark of amusement, and, perhaps, the faintest acknowledgement of the boldness that others would surely condemn. The room seemed to breathe around her, a living organism of murmurs and footfalls, chandeliers trembling with every gasp and whispered name. She could feel the tightening of her chest, the sharp sting of shame, and yet beneath it, a spark of exhilaration. It was perilous, certainly, society did not forgive, and whispers could destroy in the span of a single evening, but for the first time she felt truly seen if not yet understood. "Madam," the Duke said, his voice low, deliberate, cutting through the ambient noise like a blade tempered in velvet. His tone bore no malice, only an edge that demanded attention. "I cannot imagine how you hope to amuse yourself so recklessly in a hall filled with such decorum." Her throat constricted. Politeness dictated bowing, averting the gaze, perhaps a stammered apology. Yet she found herself drawn, against prudence, into the magnetic pull of his scrutiny. She lifted her chin, her lips curving with a faint, defiant smile, and allowed a quiet retort to escape. "I hope only to survive the evening, Your Grace. Though it seems the room itself might conspire against me." A ripple ran through the gathered assembly. Some lips tightened with disapproval, but the Duke's expression shifted only minimally, a faint arch of his brow, the slightest quiver at the corner of his mouth that betrayed a flicker of interest. In that moment the game began. She had stepped forward, however unknowingly, into a contest of wit, pride, and desire, and he had taken notice. The orchestra strings swelled, and a new couple stepped into the circle of dancing light, their movements an elegant distraction from the storm brewing in silent glances across the room. Yet she could not tear her eyes from him. In the hush between the violin's rise and the soft tap of the piano keys, she sensed a future built on whispered challenges, hidden gazes, and an intimacy that would bloom in stolen moments and quiet rebellion. Tonight, London had watched her falter and rise, and she had done both with an audacity that would haunt its elite for nights to come. The Duke stepped closer, close enough that the faint scent of sandalwood and cedarwood reached her, stirring a heady warmth against the chill of her caution. He lowered his voice just slightly, a whisper intended for her ears alone. "Madam, you tread dangerously, yet I cannot look away." And in that utterance London's grandeur, its gossip, its rigid decorum, all fell away. The danger, the thrill, the impossible audacity of it, was laid bare in the hush of that single sentence. She understood then that the evening had shifted, that the rules she had known so well were now fractured, and that the Duke, a man who seemed to command half the city, had claimed a fragment of her attention, her curiosity, and perhaps, though she did not yet know it, her heart. It was a beginning forged in shame and audacity, in curiosity and unspoken promises, and though the ballroom continued to hum with polite whispers and silken steps, she felt, beneath the flicker of candlelight and the shadow of chandeliers, that a story far greater than tonight's humiliation had begun, one that would test her wit, her courage, and the fragile dignity she so fiercely protected. The rain outside continued its soft percussion against the glass, a reminder that the city beyond the gilded walls carried its own secrets and perils. And as she stood, breath steadying, gaze unwavering, the Duke's dark eyes locked with hers one last time before he turned, leaving her both exultant and unnerved, she understood that nothing would ever be the same. The game had begun. The stakes were her reputation, her heart, and perhaps something far more dangerous, the quiet, impossible hope that she might match him in audacity and in desire. Step for step, days passed like whispered rumors, carried on the wings of the city's ever-turning gossip, yet the memory of that evening lingered in her mind with sharp clarity. The ballroom's flickering chandeliers, the hush of the assembly when her jest dared breach propriety, and the Duke's inscrutable gaze, all haunted her thoughts with a mixture of thrill and unease. She moved through the familiar routines of her station with the semblance of propriety, attending her mistress with precise care, smoothing gowns and offering measured conversation. Yet beneath each polite exchange, her mind replayed the audacity of that night. It was impossible to dismiss, for London, as ever, had begun to murmur. The first token arrived on a rain-slicked morning, delivered not by a footman, but by a quiet servant whose nervous glance betrayed the nature of the gift. She found it tucked beneath a folded lace handkerchief on her chamber dressing table. A small, delicate brooch, fashioned in gold filigree and shaped like a single rose. The craftsmanship was exquisite, the petals curling with near-breathing realism, and she recognized the subtle mark of the Duke's personal jeweler. The token was silent yet thunderous, a declaration that she had been noticed, singled out, in a city where anonymity was a shield and a curse alike. Her fingers trembled as they touched the cool metal, the weight of audacity and peril pressing upon her in equal measure. She knew, even as the excitement stirred her pulse, that such attention could ignite scandal. London's elite, for all its gilded manners, thrived on whispers, and a mere hint of connection with the Duke, whether real or imagined, would set tongues wagging with merciless speed. Her mistress, ever sharp-eyed to the undercurrents of society, remarked upon her sudden distraction with pointed questions, and the heroine answered with cautious vagueness, masking both pride and fear. The brooch rested against her heart beneath the modest bodice, hidden from view, yet it was a reminder of the dangerous dance she had begun, of the world watching from behind lace curtains and polished shutters. In the afternoons, the Duke made his presence known in ways subtle and maddening. A chance encounter in the library, a polite bow during morning promenades, and the occasional note left upon her writing desk, ink dark and deliberate, each line measured with care. One such note contained but a single sentence. "I hope your mornings are less constrained than your evenings, for the world may not always witness your courage as I have." She read it repeatedly, feeling both emboldened and disquieted, aware that each word was a tendril of connection, an unspoken challenge, a whispered invitation to a game whose rules were known to none but him. Rumors began to stir, as inevitably as clouds gather before a storm. Fellow companions, curious and ever observant, cast furtive glances, remarking upon the subtle shift in the way he acknowledged her. Gentlemen whispered that the Duke had singled her out, while matrons gasped at the impropriety of such attention. The heroine navigated these currents with care, aware that a single misstep could undo all semblance of propriety she had so carefully maintained. Yet, in secret, a thrill surged each time a carriage passed her window with curtains drawn, as though he lingered in the city's shadow, orchestrating fleeting glimpses, half-seen and full of intent. It was during one fog-laden evening that the tension crystallized. The heroine had been dispatched to arrange the latest floral display for her mistress's salon. A maze of lilacs, roses, and chrysanthemums that filled the drawing room with perfume so potent it almost stifled thought. She bent to adjust a vase, her mind drifting, when she felt the faintest brush of fabric against her shoulder. Turning, she found the Duke standing there, the mist from the window curling around his shoulders, his presence both commanding and unervingly intimate. His coat, dark and immaculate, seemed to absorb the dim light, and his eyes, catching the candle's reflection, held the same inscrutable fascination she had seen that first night. "You seem to find the scent of flowers more agreeable than the scent of scandal," he murmured, a shadow of amusement playing at his lips. There was no pretense in his observation, only the weight of a man who had long observed the world, now pausing to measure her, to assess both her courage and her discretion. She felt heat rise to her cheeks, both from the audacity of his intrusion and from the thrill that it carried, a mingling of danger and desire. "Scandal is more dangerous than fragrance, Your Grace," she replied, voice steady though her pulse betrayed her, "yet I find it far more insistent, as if it will not allow itself to be ignored." Her words were met with a faint smile, the kind that suggested he approved of her wit, if not yet fully understood the breadth of her defiance. Their encounters became a delicate game, played in stolen moments, a whispered remark across a crowded room, a token left upon a tray, a brief touch as they passed in the hallway. Each gesture, small in isolation, accumulated weight, until the world outside seemed to pulse with the energy of their unspoken contest. The city itself, with its rain-slicked streets and shadowed corners, became a backdrop to their quiet rebellion against the rules imposed upon them, a stage upon which they dared to meet eyes, if not yet hearts. Yet society, relentless and ever watchful, did not wait. A minor indiscretion, a dropped letter, glimpsed by a passing chambermaid, gave rise to whispers of impropriety. Matrons of impeccable breeding and daughters of ambitious families spoke behind gloved hands, suggesting connections that might never exist, scandal painted in bright hues on the otherwise pale canvas of propriety. She felt the weight of their judgment, an invisible hand pressing upon her shoulder, and yet, beneath it, a peculiar sense of satisfaction. If the Duke had noticed, then she was no longer invisible. If whispers stirred, then she had challenged the suffocating stillness of expectation. One evening, after the last visitor had departed and the candles guttered low, she opened another note, hidden within the folds of a carefully pressed gown. The words were sparse but deliberate. "Meet me where London hides its whispers. Come without fear or without pretense, either will serve me well." The simple instruction sent a thrill through her, mingled with dread. To meet him was to risk everything, reputation, dignity, the fragile order of her world, but also to step closer to the possibility of something she had scarcely allowed herself to name: desire, curiosity, perhaps even hope. That night, she lay awake beneath the modest canopy of her bed, the brooch cold against her heart, the Duke's words spinning in her mind like a storm barely contained. Outside, the rain beat a steady rhythm against the panes, a counterpoint to the racing pulse that carried her through memories of the ballroom, the notes, the stolen glances. She understood, with a clarity that was both exhilarating and terrifying, that she had entered a world of intrigue, of daring, of quiet but dangerous passion, and that the first, small tokens of his attention were merely the beginning of a game in which the stakes were higher than she had ever dared imagine. The city beyond her window seemed alive with whispers, the fog curling around lanterns and alleyways like a promise. And somewhere in that labyrinth of streets and shadowed corners, he waited, patient, calculating, watching. London's grand society might murmur, might scold, might threaten ruin, but she had already felt the pull of something far more potent, the private acknowledgement of a man who, despite all appearances, had taken an interest in her audacity, her wit, and the quiet flame of defiance she had never before revealed. It was only the beginning. The night air was thick with fog, curling through the narrow streets of London as if the city itself conspired to conceal what was to come. Candlelight spilled through curtained windows, trembling in the mist, and the distant tolling of a bell marked the passing of the hour with solemnity. She made her way to the secluded courtyard, heart hammering beneath the folds of her modest cloak, every step measured yet hesitant. The Duke had summoned her with words precise in their intent yet silent in meaning. Come without fear or without pretense, either will serve me well. Those words had lingered in her mind for days, a constant pulse of both anticipation and dread. The courtyard was quiet, save for the gentle patter of rain against cobblestones and the rustle of her skirts as she approached the shadowed archway. There, beneath a lone lantern whose light flickered like a hesitant heartbeat, he waited. The Duke's posture was relaxed, yet every inch of him radiated authority. His coat, dark as the night itself, absorbed the dim light, leaving only his face, sharp and composed, illuminated against the gloom. His eyes, those inscrutable orbs that had haunted her dreams and stolen her attention, softened with a rare vulnerability she had not yet witnessed. You came, he said, voice low, almost cautious. There was no pretense of ceremony, no audience to impress. It was a tone reserved for the rare moments when the world fell away and only two souls remained. She inclined her head, aware that her pulse betrayed her calm. I did as you requested, Your Grace, she replied, each word deliberate, each syllable carrying the fragile veneer of composure she had honed over years of silent observation and careful restraint. He gestured toward a stone bench, worn smooth by time and weather, and she seated herself, cloak damp from the mist, hands folded neatly in her lap. For a long moment, neither spoke, the silence stretching like a taut string between them, a test of courage, of restraint. Then in that hush he spoke again, voice almost a whisper. I have observed you these past days, not merely in passing, but in ways the world would never forgive nor understand. And yet I find myself compelled, against propriety, against reason, to know you more fully. Her heart constricted at his words. To be observed was one thing, to be understood, or so intimated, was quite another. She dared to glance up, meeting his gaze, and saw in it not the imperiousness of a man who commanded fortunes, but the quiet turbulence of one who had found a spark where none should exist. I am unworthy of such notice, she said softly, though the words rang hollow even to her own ears. The world would call me impertinent for daring to believe I might merit attention from one such as yourself. And yet, he replied, leaning closer, the damp lantern light casting shadows that flickered across his face, you have drawn my attention regardless of merit or station. Perhaps it is courage or wit, or the audacity to speak as you do, that has undone me. His words were a mixture of confession and challenge, a delicate dance along a precipice she had not yet fully recognized. She shifted slightly, aware of the closeness, of the air between them charged with unspoken possibilities. Courage, she murmured, is often mistaken for folly when wielded by those without rank or power. And audacity can be punished most severely in a city such as this. Her hands clenched lightly in her lap, the cool stone beneath her palms grounding her even as the gravity of the moment threatened to overwhelm. He smiled faintly, a slow, deliberate curl of his lips that seemed to acknowledge both her defiance and her fear. Punishment may await, yet I wonder if some risks are worth the peril. I wonder if the smallest truths, revealed in secret, might carry more weight than the grandest lies proclaimed in public. His gaze held hers, unwavering, and in that scrutiny she felt herself laid bare, stripped of all pretense, judged not for rank or fortune but for the essence of who she was. For a long moment, silence reigned once more, punctuated only by the distant tolling of bells and the patter of rain. Then she spoke, voice trembling despite her resolve. And what would you know of me, Your Grace? I am nothing but a servant, a companion to those of higher station. You may observe, you may bestow tokens, but you cannot know the fears, the hopes, the quiet thoughts I guard so fiercely. Perhaps, he said, tone gentle yet insistent, it is precisely because you are hidden beneath layers of expectation and duty that I am drawn to you. The city sees only the station sees only propriety, and yet I see, perhaps foolishly, perhaps dangerously, something beyond. Something that speaks of defiance, of resilience, and of the rarest courage, the courage to be oneself. Her breath caught at his words. Few had ever spoken to her in such a manner, acknowledging not her station but her essence. And yet, mingled with the wonder, a shadow of fear lingered. To be seen so fully by a man of his power and reputation was both intoxicating and terrifying. What expectations, what consequences might follow such intimacy even in secrecy? She lowered her gaze, torn between desire and caution, between the thrill of recognition and the weight of consequence. And if the world were to know, she asked softly, what would you say? Would you defend me, or would I be cast aside like so many others who dared to step beyond their place? He inclined his head slowly, eyes dark and unwavering. The world will always judge, always whisper. Yet in this moment, here and now, I can promise only this, that I see you. I understand you, perhaps as no one else dares, and I will not falter in my regard, regardless of consequence. Her heart swelled with a mixture of relief and terror. To be understood was a gift she had scarcely imagined possible, yet the path forward remained uncertain, fraught with danger and the relentless scrutiny of a society quick to condemn. And yet, in his presence, she felt a courage she had not known she possessed, a willingness to speak truths that had long lain buried beneath propriety and restraint. She began, then faltered, words trapped by emotion she had no desire to conceal. The Duke reached out, his gloved hand brushing lightly against hers, a gesture at once simple and electrifying. The touch carried weight, promise, and a quiet intensity that made the world beyond the courtyard fade into insignificance. "Say nothing if you wish," he murmured, "for sometimes the heart's confessions need not be spoken aloud to be understood." And in that moment, beneath the misted lamplight and the soft chorus of rain, the fragile, dangerous intimacy between them solidified. A promise unspoken passed between them, stronger than any declaration, binding them in a shared secret of desire, courage, and the audacity to defy expectation. The Duke withdrew slightly, his gaze lingering, and she felt the quiet ache of longing, tempered by the knowledge that their connection, though profound, existed in the delicate shadows of secrecy. As she departed, the fog curling about her like a cloak, she carried with her the weight of his acknowledgment, the thrill of audacity rewarded, and the tension of a story only beginning to unfold. London streets, damp and shrouded in mist, seemed alive with possibility, whispering of encounters yet to come, of risks to be taken, and of the slow, inevitable deepening of something far more potent than curiosity alone. And so, in the hush of that fog-laden night, the boundaries between propriety and desire blurred, leaving her heart both exhilarated and wary, the path forward illuminated by the rare, dangerous truth of being seen, truly seen, by one who wielded the power to both elevate and destroy. The grand ballroom glittered like a constellation caught in gilded glass, every chandelier a frozen star suspended above the polished floor. The air was heavy with perfume, wax, and expectation, a tangible pressure that pressed upon every assembled guest. Music swelled, violins and cellos intertwining in a languid, persistent rhythm that seemed to echo the heartbeat of London itself. Tonight, the city's elite had gathered not merely to display wealth or elegance, but to witness the theater of propriety, and the heroine knew, with a mixture of dread and resolve, that the performance had shifted irreversibly in her favor, or peril. She entered alongside her mistress, her skirts carefully arranged, her dark eyes bright with alertness beneath the sweep of her veil. Whispers flitted through the crowd like anxious birds, some drawn to her presence, others to the subtle tension that clung to her like a second skin. The brooch the Duke had gifted rested over her heart, hidden beneath folds of silk, yet it pulsed like a signal only she could feel. Every glance cast her way carried speculation, and every stiff nod from a matron seemed to weigh upon her, measuring audacity against decorum. She had no intention of faltering tonight. The hour of reckoning, long whispered and anticipated, had arrived. Across the ballroom, the Duke observed with the detachment of one accustomed to command, yet beneath the polished mask, there burned a deliberate, simmering intensity. His presence was magnetic, drawing every eye even as he carefully ignored them, until his gaze settled on her with unyielding precision. The world around them became a blur of silk and powdered faces, of polite laughter and discreet glances. Each step she took toward the center of the room seemed measured against the invisible scales of gossip and propriety. And then, as if summoned by thought alone, he approached. The Duke's movement was deliberate, the faintest smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. He crossed the marble floor with the certainty of one accustomed to ownership, not merely of property but of attention and influence. Their eyes met, and in that instant the fragile tension between scandal and desire coalesced into a sharp, electric current. A ripple passed through the assembly, some felt curiosity, others shock, and a few muttered scandalized murmurs. But he ignored them all, his focus singular, drawn entirely to her. "You are bold," he murmured, his voice low yet carrying through the hush of anticipation. "Bold enough to walk this floor with the world's eyes upon you, yet defiant enough to meet them without fear." Her lips pressed into a faint, controlled smile. "I have learned from observation, Your Grace," she replied, voice steady, "that the world's scrutiny is most perilous when wielded with caution and wit. I would hope my own courage might balance both." A subtle smile curved his lips, approving, and yet his eyes were sharp, assessing. He extended a hand, gloved and precise, the faintest tremor betraying the weight of the gesture. "Then allow me," he said, "to lend the world a demonstration of my regard and of yours." Music swelled once more, and without waiting for consent from the ballroom's assembled elite, he drew her into the center of the floor. Gasps punctuated the air, some masked as delight, others barely contained horror. Yet she did not hesitate. Her gaze held his, steady and unflinching, and she allowed herself to be guided into the opening steps of the dance, her skirts sweeping the floor with elegance, her heart hammering in tandem with the rhythm of strings and whispers. Every step was a declaration. Each movement, measured and deliberate, defied expectation and scorched convention. The Duke led with an assurance that both protected and challenged her, guiding her through a choreography that spoke of intimacy and audacity. Their bodies were not close, yet every glance, every subtle touch of the hand, carried weight far beyond propriety. The room, once a stage of polite performances, became a crucible of tension, desire, and social defiance. Some guests whispered of impropriety, their voices tight with fear or envy. A few matrons cast disapproving glances, their gloved hands pressed to their mouths, yet the effect was precisely the opposite of what they intended. The heroine stood taller, more radiant in her courage, more luminous in her wit. And the Duke, for all his reputation of cold calculation and wealth, displayed a tenderness and focus that spoke of a private reverence, reserved for her alone amidst the glare of London's judgment. At the dance's apex he paused, drawing her close, not in intimacy, yet with unmistakable attention. The violins swelled and then softened, the room holding its collective breath as he whispered, near enough for her alone to hear, "Let them judge, let them whisper. Tonight I see only you, and the audacity that has claimed my attention." Her heart leapt, a strange mixture of triumph and terror. To be seen in such a manner, publicly yet intimately, was to invite both admiration and scrutiny, praise and scandal. Yet she met his gaze, steady, unwavering, and responded with the courage that had carried her from whispered jokes in the ballroom to this pinnacle of risk. "Then let them see, your grace. Let them witness courage in its most honest form." He inclined his head, a subtle acknowledgment, and in that moment, the room seemed to crystallize around them. Every whispered remark, every darting glance, every judgmental stare became a backdrop to their unspoken alliance. They were a force of audacity, unbowed by the rigid strictures of class or expectation, bound together by courage, wit, and the delicate thread of attraction that had grown through notes, tokens, and stolen glances. As the dance ended, the Duke guided her to a secluded corner of the ballroom, away from prying eyes yet still within the electric tension of observation. He lowered his voice, deliberate and intimate, as though each word carried weight enough to bend reality. "The world may rail against us, may seek to punish, may whisper endlessly. Yet I shall not falter, nor shall I permit you to do so. Courage, wit, and defiance, these are virtues in a world otherwise blind to merit." Her chest rose and fell, the thrill of triumph mingling with the peril of exposure. She understood, fully and with stark clarity, that the declaration had shifted the tide. Their connection was no longer a whispered secret, no longer a shadowed dalliance. It was now visible, undeniable, a spectacle that would ignite gossip, envy, and speculation. Yet she felt no fear, only a sharp, exhilarating certainty that she had chosen the correct audacity, that she had stepped forward when hesitation might have doomed her to invisibility. The Duke released her hand, yet his gaze lingered, a tether invisible yet unbreakable. "We have begun, madam," he said quietly, "something the world may not yet comprehend. And it is only fitting that those who dare to watch bear witness to the courage that brought us here." She inclined her head, feeling both pride and anticipation. "Then let them watch, your grace. Let them see the measure of audacity, and of those who wield it." The crowd, meanwhile, had begun to murmur anew, whispers rising into a chorus that could not ignore them. Some eyes glinted with admiration, others with envy, and yet the heroine, standing amidst the swirl of silk, candlelight, and intrigue, knew that she had crossed a threshold. London society could speculate, condemn, or exalt, but she had claimed her agency, her voice, and perhaps most dangerously, the attention of a man whose power could elevate or destroy. And in the quiet fold of that acknowledgment, between triumph and peril, the first true chords of a deeper narrative took hold. One of daring, desire, and the slow, inevitable escalation toward something far greater than a mere ballroom gesture. The stakes had been set, the audience alerted, and the tension, once simmering in secrecy, now roared with the promise of a storm yet to come. Tonight, courage had been declared. Tonight, Audacity had won a moment of reckoning. And tomorrow the consequences would arrive, silent yet unavoidable, carrying with them the promise of scandal, revelation, and the fragile, irresistible pull of hearts entangled in defiance and desire. The dawn broke over London with a pale, reluctant light, spilling across rooftops slick with rain and gilding the mist that lingered in alleyways and courtyards alike. The city, still murmuring from the previous night's display, seemed to hold its breath as though it, too, awaited the culmination of the quiet yet relentless drama that had taken root in the heart of its most guarded corners. She stepped onto the terrace of her mistress's townhouse, the morning chill biting through the folds of her shawl, and felt the lingering weight of expectation pressing upon her shoulders. Yet beneath it, there was a current of anticipation, sharp and electrifying, for she knew the Duke would claim this morning as he had claimed the previous evening, not with ceremony or pretense, but with the quiet, undeniable force of his presence. The carriage rolled to a stop at the curb, its polished panels gleaming in the diffuse light, and he emerged, his coat dark against the haze, gloves clasped in one hand, a single rose in the other. The rose was crimson, bold and unyielding, like the attention he bestowed, and she caught her breath at the sight, her pulse quickening despite herself. He approached with deliberate, measured steps, each one carrying both command and tenderness, a duality she had long come to recognize and against reason crave. "Madam," he said, bowing slightly yet with a weight that carried no subservience, "the city stirs with whispers, but I find they matter less than the truth we hold between us. Step into the carriage, if you will, and leave speculation to those who thrive upon it." Her hand rested lightly against the polished wood as she climbed inside, the rose cradled carefully in her palm. She met his gaze, and for a moment, words were unnecessary. The silent acknowledgment between them carried more meaning than any whispered conversation could convey. The carriage lurched forward, wheels turning over wet cobblestones, and the world beyond seemed to blur, leaving only the intimacy of their shared space, the quiet pulse of possibility between them, and the tension of what had begun long before this morning. They traveled through streets still veiled in mist, past the river's dark ribbon reflecting the waking light, until the carriage halted before a private garden, secluded and fragrant with early blooms. Here, away from prying eyes and the constant judgment of London's society, they could exist as themselves, unmasked, unmeasured by rank or rumor. The Duke offered his hand and she took it, the simple gesture laden with years of unspoken tension and restrained longing. He led her along the winding path, the dew dampening the hems of her skirts, petals brushing her fingertips as though nature itself conspired to bless this union of audacity and desire. "You have walked boldly through corridors of judgment," he said, voice low, measured and intimate, "yet still I wonder at the strength of your restraint and the depth of your courage. London may never forgive, but I—" He paused, searching her eyes. "I cannot and will not withdraw my regard." Her chest rose and fell, heart caught between the exhilaration of recognition and the fear of consequences that loomed like storm clouds on the horizon. "And yet, Your Grace, the world is relentless. The whispers, the scrutiny, the constant threat of scandal, it would not spare us, nor our hearts, if we allowed them dominion." He cupped her face gently, a tenderness so incongruous with his usual command that it startled her into stillness. "Then let them whisper. Let them scorn and judge. We have known risk from the first glance, the first jest, the first token left upon a tray. And yet, here we stand, having survived every murmur, every shadowed gaze. What is the world to those who dare to define their own hearts?" Her hands rested upon his, the warmth of contact grounding the storm of her thoughts. "I feared the consequences," she admitted softly, "yet in your presence I feel as though courage might sustain me where fear once ruled. Perhaps audacity is its own reward." A faint smile curved his lips, both approving and tender. "Audacity, courage, and truth, these are rare commodities, madam, and you possess them in abundance. It is for this reason and no other that I make my claim, not in secrecy, but in deliberate acknowledgement. You are no longer hidden, no longer a shadow to be whispered about. You are known to me fully, and I shall not retreat." The morning sun broke further through the mist, light spilling across the garden, gilding the dew-drenched petals in a radiance that seemed to bless their union. He drew her closer, the distance between them collapsing in a gesture at once careful and daring, and she felt the culmination of every stolen glance, every note, every token of attention settle into a single, tangible moment. Here there was no society to censor her thoughts, no matrons to judge her expression, no whispered rumors to twist intention. There was only the raw, undeniable truth of what had grown quietly and dangerously between them. "Do you understand?" he asked, voice low, the faintest tremor betraying the intensity beneath his composure. This is no fleeting fancy. It is deliberate, chosen, and fortified by every risk we have endured. I claim you not as a conquest nor as a curiosity, but as the measure of my regard, the reflection of what I cannot ignore in either world or heart. Her breath caught, eyes glistening with the gravity of the declaration. Then I accept, she said, voice firm yet infused with emotion. I accept the peril, the scrutiny, and the audacity of what we have begun. Let the world whisper. I will not waver. A long pause followed, the silence heavy yet rich with resolution. Then he lifted the crimson rose to her lips, a gesture at once ceremonial and intimate, allowing the fragrance, the symbolism, and the intent to speak in place of words. She inhaled softly, understanding that in that single act, the culmination of every private confession, every stolen glance, and every calculated risk had found a form both public and delicate, powerful yet tender. The garden seemed to hold its breath, the mist curling around their figures as if shielding them from the world. He pressed her hand to his chest, feeling the steady beat of her heart, and she felt the echo of hers in his own, a rhythm born of trust, defiance, and desire that had been nurtured through whispered risks and tokens of boldness. Whatever awaits beyond these walls, he said finally, voice steady, we face it together. London may murmur, may judge, may attempt to dictate our fates, but nothing shall sever this bond forged in courage and honesty. She nodded, heart swelling with a mixture of relief, exhilaration, and awe. Together, she echoed, the word carrying the weight of promise, the thrill of audacity, and the quiet certainty that whatever storms would follow, they would weather them side by side. The mist began to lift as the sun rose higher, gilding the garden in light and leaving the city beyond hazy yet alive with possibility. They stood hand in hand, the crimson rose between them, the culmination of whispered risks, daring encounters, and audacious courage realized. London would talk, society would speculate, and envy would fester, yet none could touch the truth they now shared: recognition, desire, and the audacity to claim one another against all expectation. As they stepped toward the carriage that would bear them back to the city, the air seemed charged with both relief and anticipation. The journey ahead remained uncertain, fraught with societal scrutiny and the latent peril of scandal, yet in this moment, nothing could diminish the quiet triumph of hearts aligned, of audacity rewarded, and of a love forged in courage, wit, and deliberate defiance. And so, beneath the awakening London sky, they rode side by side, hands clasped, hearts steady, a singular truth carried between them: that audacity, courage, and love, when wielded with intention and honesty, could defy the world, the whispers, and even the most rigid strictures of society. The game was not over, yet the first victory had been claimed, and the horizon stretched before them, illuminated by possibility, daring, and the quiet power of hearts undaunted.